In this video, we're looking at times where feeding wild animals turned fatal, from an alligator attack in the Louisiana bayou to a tiger mauling at an Oklahoma roadside zoo. But first, we begin in the forests of northern Michigan, where one woman's years of feeding wild bears would end in the most brutal way imaginable. It was September 23, 2016, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the forested hills of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The autumn air carried the sharp scent of fallen leaves and the first hints of approaching winter. Across the remote backcountry, black bears moved through the forests in a state of desperate hunger, their bodies driven by an ancient biological imperative to consume as many calories as possible before their winter denning period. Marleta Ketchum, a 54-year-old retired postal worker, had lived alone on her 40-acre property for nearly 8 years. The isolated parcel sat at the end of a 2-mile dirt road, surrounded by unbroken forest, and visited only occasionally by her nephew who lived in town. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away, and cell service was unreliable at best. Marleta had purchased the land with her pension savings, seeking the solitude and wildlife encounters that drew many retirees to the Upper Peninsula. Her nephew later told investigators that she had no close friends in the area and kept largely to herself, content with the rhythm of seasons and the animals that moved through her land. What had begun as casual observation had evolved into something far more dangerous. Marleta had been deliberately feeding black bears on her property for over 3 years, establishing multiple feeding stations near her cabin where she left dog food, kitchen scraps, and deliberately unsecured garbage bags. She documented the bears extensively, posting photographs to social media accounts where she described her special connection with the animals and assigned them individual names based on their markings. Followers on her accounts occasionally expressed concern, but Marleta responded with confidence, insisting that the bears trusted her and that she could read their moods. Neighbors had expressed concern on multiple occasions, warning that feeding bears removed their natural wariness of humans and created dangerous situations. Michigan Department of Natural Resources officers had visited Marleta's property twice over the previous 18 months, issuing warnings and citations that feeding wildlife was illegal and explaining the serious risks involved. Marleta had dismissed these warnings, insisting the bears were gentle and that she understood their behavior better than the authorities did. She continued her feeding routine without interruption. By late September, the biological phenomenon known as hyperphagia had taken full control of the bear population. During this period, black bears can consume up to 20,000 calories per day, spending the majority of their waking hours actively foraging as their bodies prepare for months of winter dormancy. The guaranteed food sources at Marleta's property had attracted multiple bears over the years, conditioning them to associate her cabin with easy calories and teaching them that humans posed no threat. The scent of dog food and rotting scraps carried through the forest on the evening breeze, drawing bears from surrounding territory toward the familiar stations. That evening, Marleta followed her established routine, walking from her cabin to the nearest feeding station, approximately 60 yards into the tree line. She carried a large plastic bin filled with dog food and vegetable scraps. The sun had dropped below the horizon, leaving only fading twilight filtering through the dense canopy. The forest floor was soft with decomposing leaves, and the air had turned cool as the last light drained from the sky. Black bears are North America's most common bear species, with adult males weighing between 250 and 600 pounds and standing over 5 feet tall when upright. Despite their name, their fur ranges from black to cinnamon brown. Black bears possess exceptional senses of smell, capable of detecting food sources from miles away. While typically shy and avoiding human contact, bears that become food-conditioned lose their natural wariness and begin to view humans as sources of nutrition rather than threats to avoid. During hyperphagia, this conditioning becomes especially dangerous as the bear's desperation for calories overrides remaining caution. Though attacks on humans are rare, predatory attacks by black bears, while uncommon, are well documented in wildlife literature. These attacks typically involve single large males, and often occur in remote areas where bears have become habituated to human presence. A black bear's jaw strength can fracture skull and bone, and their claws, measuring up to 2 inches, can inflict deep lacerations. One bear in particular had been feeding regularly at Marleda's stations for months. Conservation officers would later estimate the animal to be a large adult male, likely between 350 and 450 pounds, based on tracks recovered at the scene. The bear had been resting in thick brush near the feeding station when Marleda approached that evening. The animal emerged from cover as Marleda set down the plastic bin. In the dim light, the bear's dark shape was barely distinguishable from the surrounding brush until it stepped into the narrow clearing near the station. She turned and found herself facing the bear at a distance of less than 15 feet. Evidence suggested she backpedaled instinctively, her foot catching on an exposed root near the feeding station. She fell backward, landing hard on the forest floor. The bear closed the distance immediately. Forensic evidence indicated its jaws clamped down on the back of Marleda's head and neck, causing severe cranial trauma and damage to the upper cervical region. Investigators stated the evidence was consistent with predatory behavior, as the bear's behavior following the initial bite matched documented patterns of black bears feeding on prey rather than neutralizing a perceived threat. The bear appeared to have released its initial grip and shifted its attention to her lower body, biting into her thighs and abdominal area. The injuries were catastrophic, with deep tissue trauma and massive hemorrhage consistent with rapid blood loss. Forensic evidence would later suggest Marleda remained alive briefly during the initial attack, as defensive wounds on her forearms indicated she had attempted to protect herself, and blood distribution patterns and disturbance at the scene suggested movement during the initial assault. The bear dragged Marleda's body intermittently approximately 80 yards deeper into the forest, pulling her through undergrowth and leaving a disturbed trail investigators would follow 3 days later. Evidence of attempted caching was visible, though the remains had been disturbed, likely by other bears drawn to the area. Marleda's nephew arrived at the property on September 26th, after 3 days of unanswered phone calls. He had tried reaching her cell phone repeatedly before driving out to the property himself. He later told investigators that a growing sense of unease was already settling over him as he turned onto the dirt road. He found her truck parked beside the cabin, the door unlocked, and no sign of his aunt. A half-filled cup of coffee sat on the kitchen counter, and the plastic bin she used for bear food was missing from its usual spot near the back door. The cabin showed no signs of struggle or forced entry. His 911 call brought conservation officers and search teams to the remote property within hours. Search dogs located Marleda's scattered remains in the forest that afternoon. The condition of the body and surrounding evidence indicated bear predation, with clear signs that multiple animals had scavenged the site over the 3-day period. Michigan DNR officers euthanized 3 bears in the immediate area over the following days. DNA analysis and stomach content examination, completed weeks later, confirmed one bear as the primary attacker, while the remaining 2 were euthanized due to aggressive habituation behavior and confirmed feeding on the remains. The investigation documented years of illegal feeding activity that had removed the bear's natural wariness and created the conditions for a fatal attack. While Michigan's forests had claimed Marleda Ketchum, the bayous of Louisiana would soon prove that feeding wild animals was equally horrifying in the water. It was June 8, 2014, and the thick humidity of early summer hung over the bayou country outside New Orleans. The dark water of the slow-moving channel reflected the overhanging cypress trees, their massive trunks rising from the shallows. Spanish moss hung motionless in the still air, and the surface of the water was broken only by the occasional ripple of movement beneath. The breeding season had brought increased activity among the bayou's alligator population, with large males establishing and defending territories along the waterway. Torrance Blanchette, a 61-year-old former riverboat worker, had lived in the small bayou community for his entire life. His modest house sat on a half-acre lot with direct water access via a low wooden dock that extended 15 feet from the bank, its weathered planks just inches above the dark water's surface. Since retiring 7 years earlier, Torrance had developed a routine that his wife had opposed from the beginning. He fed the bayou's alligators deliberately and regularly, tossing chicken parts and fish scraps from his dock several times per week. The activity had started casually, but had evolved into scheduled feedings that attracted both local residents and occasional tourists who heard about the spectacle through word of mouth. Torrance had named several of the regular alligators that appeared at his dock, treating them as familiar fixtures rather than dangerous predators. He enjoyed the attention his feeding sessions generated, often inviting neighbors and relatives to watch. On warm evenings, he would pull a lawn chair to the dock's edge and wait for the alligators to surface, narrating their arrivals to anyone who would listen. His wife had argued against the practice repeatedly, warning that he was teaching wild animals to associate humans with food. Several neighbors had filed complaints with the parish wildlife office over the previous 2 years, concerned that Torrance's activities were creating a dangerous situation that extended beyond his own property. Children in the neighborhood played near the water, and residents worried that conditioned alligators no longer feared the sound of human voices along the bank. The complaints remained on record, though enforcement action had been limited to a single warning letter. That evening, Torrance had invited extended family visiting from Baton Rouge to witness a feeding. 6 people stood on his dock and in the yard as twilight settled over the bayou, their conversations interrupted by splashing as alligators began appearing in the channel near the dock. Torrance had retrieved a bucket of chicken parts from his refrigerator and moved to the dock's edge, leaning down toward the water as he prepared to throw the first piece. American alligators are the largest reptiles in North America, with adult males commonly reaching lengths of 11 to 14 feet and weights exceeding 500 pounds. Their prehistoric appearance reflects a lineage that has remained largely unchanged for millions of years. Alligators are ambush predators, typically hunting from the water's edge, where they can remain motionless for extended periods before exploding into sudden, violent action. Their bite force is one of the most powerful ever measured in a living animal, and their interlocking teeth are designed to grip and hold rather than slice. When feeding, alligators employ a distinctive death roll, spinning their bodies violently while maintaining their grip to tear away manageable pieces of prey. During breeding season, in late spring and early summer, male alligators become more territorial and aggressive, though their response to humans remains primarily driven by learned associations rather than seasonal hormones. Alligators that are fed by humans lose their natural wariness and begin to actively approach people in expectation of food, creating dangerous situations where proximity and feeding behavior intersect. An 11-foot male had been one of Torrance's regular visitors for over a year, appearing consistently during feeding times. The massive reptile had been resting in the shallows within 10 feet of the dock, nearly invisible in the dark water. As Torrance leaned down with chicken in his hand, the alligator detected the movement and familiar activity that had preceded feedings dozens of times before. The attack happened in an instant. The alligator lunged forward with explosive speed, its massive body propelling from the water as its jaws opened wide. The sound of its jaws snapping shut echoed across the bayou. The teeth clamped down on Torrance's right forearm and wrist, the crushing force fracturing the bones. Torrance screamed as the alligator's weight pulled him forward off the dock's edge and into the dark water. Witnesses on the dock reported seeing Torrance's body disappear beneath the surface as the alligator initiated its death roll. The violent rotation lasted several seconds before both the alligator and its victim disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only disturbed water and spreading ripples. Family members on the dock screamed and dialed 911 immediately. Parish sheriff's deputies and wildlife enforcement officers arrived within 20 minutes, but the bayou had returned to dark stillness. A recovery operation began as daylight faded, using boats equipped with spotlights and trained personnel familiar with alligator behavior. The dark water and dense vegetation made the search slow and dangerous, with officers scanning the shallows methodically while maintaining safe distance from the bank. Torrance Blanchette's body was recovered approximately 6 hours after the attack, found in submerged vegetation roughly 40 yards from his dock. Autopsy results indicated drowning consistent with submersion, combined with massive trauma from the initial attack. The alligator had stashed the body in a location consistent with typical feeding behavior. Wildlife officers located and euthanized the 11-foot male the following morning. Stomach content analysis confirmed human tissue. The investigation documented Torrance's years of illegal feeding activity and the neighbor complaints already on record with the parish wildlife office. Authorities dismantled the feeding stations and posted warning signs along the channel. Wildlife officials conducted patrols in the area over the following weeks to assess additional habituated alligators. While Louisiana's waterways had delivered their own brutal lesson, a roadside zoo in Oklahoma would demonstrate that captive predators fed by human hands could be just as deadly. It was March 17, 2015, and the early spring afternoon brought warm temperatures to the flat landscape of rural Oklahoma. The facility advertised itself as an exotic animal sanctuary, but the reality was far less noble. The unaccredited roadside operation occupied 12 acres along a county highway. Its collection of aging enclosures housing tigers, bears, and various other animals acquired through the poorly regulated exotic pet trade. A hand-painted sign along the highway advertised admission prices and photo opportunities with the animals. The gravel parking lot held space for perhaps a dozen cars. Dwennell Porterman, a 47-year-old woman who identified herself as the facility's owner and operator, had purchased the property 4 years earlier with money inherited from her parents. She had no formal training in animal husbandry or wildlife management, and her facility operated on minimal oversight. The operation charged admission to visitors who walked along dirt paths between chain-link enclosures, with additional fees collected for special experiences, including supervised feeding sessions, where visitors could toss meat to the animals from outside the barriers. The facility had accumulated multiple USDA violations over the previous 3 years, cited for inadequate enclosure maintenance, improper veterinary care, and failure to maintain required safety protocols. Dwennell's operating license had been under investigation for renewal violations for the previous 6 months, though she had continued operating while claiming the renewal was being processed. The facility employed only 2 part-time workers whose primary responsibilities involved basic cleaning and food preparation. Neither had any formal wildlife training. The Bengal tiger had arrived at the facility 2 years earlier, purchased from a private owner in Texas whose own breeding operation had been shut down by state authorities. The male tiger weighed approximately 420 pounds and measured nearly 10 feet from nose to tail. Despite being kept in captivity since it was a cub, the animal retained every instinct of a wild predator. The tiger lived in a quarter-acre enclosure surrounded by 10-foot chain-link fencing without inward overhang that showed significant rust and poor maintenance. Despite the tiger's size and obvious power, Dwennell had developed a casual attitude toward safety protocols, frequently entering the enclosure alone to deliver food and clean water troughs. She often told visitors the tiger was gentle and that they had a bond built on years of trust. That afternoon, the facility's single employee had called in sick, leaving Dwennell to handle all responsibilities alone. Visitor traffic had been light, with only 2 families present during the early afternoon. By 3 o'clock, Dwennell had begun preparing the afternoon feeding, filling plastic buckets with chunks of chicken and beef purchased from a local butcher. She had developed a routine shortcut over previous months, bypassing the shift-gate system and entering the tiger's enclosure directly, rather than using the feeding chute that required additional time and effort. The tiger had never displayed aggression toward her during these intrusions, and investigators believe that by this point, Dwennell had convinced herself the animal recognized her as non-threatening. Tigers are the largest members of the cat family, with adult male Bengals reaching weights between 400 and 550 pounds. Their muscular build and powerful limbs make them apex predators capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves. Tigers hunt primarily through ambush, using explosive acceleration and one of the strongest bite forces of any land predator to deliver killing bites to the neck or throat. Their 4-inch canine teeth are designed to puncture vital structures, crushing the trachea or compressing the cervical vessels. In captivity, tigers retain all their predatory instincts despite regular human contact, and the apparent docility displayed toward familiar handlers can disappear instantly if the animal perceives an opportunity to express natural hunting behavior. Captive big cats are responsible for dozens of serious attacks on humans in the United States over the past several decades, with many incidents involving experienced handlers who believed they had established trust with individual animals. The unpredictability of captive tiger behavior represents one of the most dangerous misconceptions in exotic animal ownership. Dwinelle unlatched the enclosure gate and stepped inside, carrying a 5-gallon bucket filled with meat chunks. The tiger had been resting in shade at the far end of the enclosure, but raised its massive head as she entered. She walked approximately 15 feet from the gate before bending down to set the bucket on the ground, her back partially turned toward the animal. The tiger rose to its feet and moved forward with deliberate steps. Dwinelle straightened and turned to face the approaching animal, taking 2 steps backward. Her path to the gate was no longer clear. The tiger's movement accelerated suddenly, closing the remaining distance in a blur of striped fur and muscle. The attack was instantaneous. The tiger's jaws clamped down on Dwinelle's neck and right shoulder, the massive canines puncturing the neck and causing catastrophic trauma to the cervical vessels. The impact knocked her off her feet as the tiger's weight bore her to the ground. The bite caused catastrophic vascular trauma, leading to rapid blood loss. The tiger maintained its grip, shaking once with tremendous force before beginning to drag her across the enclosure toward a sheltered corner. The 2 families visiting the facility had been near an adjacent enclosure when the screaming began. One witness later reported seeing the tiger dragging Dwinelle's body before immediately calling 911. The emergency call reached the county sheriff's office at 3:17 p.m., dispatching the nearest deputy to the location. The responding deputy arrived shortly after the 911 call, approaching the facility to find visitors gathered near the parking area in obvious distress. He directed the families to move their vehicles to the road before approaching the enclosure on foot. The deputy moved toward the tiger enclosure, where he observed the animal lying near the fence line, guarding Dwinelle's motionless body approximately 20 feet away. The tiger showed no interest in leaving its position. The deputy retrieved his patrol rifle and repositioned to obtain a clearer angle between the fence links. The tiger rose to its feet as the deputy took aim. He fired 3 rounds, striking the animal in the chest and head. The tiger staggered and collapsed after several seconds. Emergency medical personnel entered the enclosure once the scene was secured, but Dwinelle Porterman had died from catastrophic neck trauma. The massive blood loss had caused death within minutes of the initial bite. The investigation revealed the full scope of the facility's violations and dangerous practices. USDA inspectors placed the facility under immediate review, pending enforcement action, and the facility ceased public operations pending investigation. USDA and state authorities seized all remaining animals over the following week, relocating them to accredited sanctuaries. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.